All right, so we're going to get started. Just to kick things off, because there's an awful lot of information to cover today. I want to welcome you to this special meeting this morning. My name is Karen Bingert. I am the new Executive Director of the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association. I want to welcome you to the, get this title, American Rescue Plan Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief, AKA ARP, ESSER 1, 2, and 3, Technical Assistance Session. I will wait 20 minutes if you want to write that down and title your notes page. With a title like that, you know that you're going to get some great information today, and it's going to be very applicable because at the end of it is information about how you're going to be able to help kids. It's truly my pleasure to welcome you this morning and to take this opportunity to thank you for everything that you are doing this year. You know, education has always been a challenging job, and both in front of the class and behind the scenes. And that's never been more true than in the last year and a half. COVID has forced everyone to break the molds and to figure out so much anew. And you have done it and continue to do it every single day to give our students the best experiences that you possibly can. I've never been more proud to be a part of the educational community, and I am so grateful to each of you as you continue to work outside the box for our students. The real question is seeing how ARP ESSER funds can help you do this. And we're really honored to host the New Jersey Department of Education today to help you bring your ideas to fruition in your schools and in immediately applicable ways that will help your students and your staff. So be sure you take good notes. There are good ideas and helpful hints to follow. A few quick reminders before we go any further. Please remember to keep your mics muted, just to keep us all able to follow what's going on. Post your questions in the chat box, which will be moderated throughout the session today. And I want to remind everybody that a video will be shared afterwards with everybody who's been registered today, and then it will be uploaded onto the resources page of the NJTSS website. So without further ado, let's get down to the meat of things. I'm really happy to introduce to you Dr. Kate Zehut, the Director of the Office of Fiscal and Data Services from the New Jersey Department of Education. Kate.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you and to be able to discuss these funds that can be used to really help our kids and help our educators work our way out of this pandemic. So how we're going to start today, I'm going to provide some background information on the ESSER funds. As noted, there have been 3 rounds of ESSER funding, and spend some time talking about the ARP ESSER state set-aside funds. So the goals for today's presentation are really, sorry, I think I just said this, to provide a brief overview, to highlight the needs assessment process that needs to take place for helping districts with the use of funds, review the grants funded with ARP ESSER state set-aside. There are some new and exciting grants with a lot of money attached to them. And with ARP ESSER, we'll also talk about the requirements that are with ARP ESSER. Staff from the department, I'll say it again, are going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat, and you can leave your mics muted for now. Next slide, please. All right. So it is truly staggering to think about the amount of emergency relief funds that have been allocated to education in the last 18 months. More than $4.5 billion federal dollars have been allocated to New Jersey school districts. In the words of the great East Coast rapper, singer, songwriter, Notorious B.I.G., this means mo money, mo problem. Or to paraphrase Peter Parker, with great wealth comes great responsibility. This amount of funding, as you all have truly experienced and felt in the last 18 months, brings with it a great deal of work. From determining how best to spend funds, to purchasing items or running programs, to collecting and analyzing data on the effectiveness of those programs. This is an extremely busy time in the education world. Next slide, please. So the law governing the ESSER fund was first authorized in March 2020. The funds were intended as emergency relief funds to be used to prevent, prepare for, or respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Funds can be used for a list of allowable uses, but the legislation emphasizes addressing the impact of the pandemic on the social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs of students. Next slide, please. So this slide provides some background on the first round of ESSER funding. We called it CARES funding, or ESSER 1. It's CARES is short for Coronavirus Relief and Economic Security. That act was authorized in March 2020. It created the ESSER fund, and the next two acts added supplemental funding to the original ESSER fund. So New Jersey received over $310 million from ESSER 1 CARES, 90% of which was distributed directly to school districts based on a formula. Thank you. The second round of emergency funding, which I think we called ESSER 2, but it also went by the name CARISA, which stands for the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, was passed in 2020, and it provided additional funds for ESSER. And importantly, school districts no longer had to provide equitable services to non-public schools with their funds because the law established a completely new program for providing aid to non-public schools. This program is called the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools, or EAMS. Next slide. Now we're on to number 3. This is ESSER 3, or ARP, the American Rescue Plan. It was passed, this act was passed in March of 2021. It further funded ESSER and EAMS. So again, there are no equitable services to non-public schools with ARP money. But there are requirements in ARP that were not in the other 2 rounds of funding. New Jersey received an unbelievable, in my mind, $2.7 billion in aid from the ARP ESSER program. But like I said, this money comes with a number of requirements, both for states and for school districts. Okay, let's go to the next slide, which really details those requirements. So this slide illustrates all the different allocation requirements for ARP ESSER, both for the state and for districts. So if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, this part shows how districts that receive ESSER funds from ARP must use, and these are districts that receive the mandatory subgrant, so part of the 90% that has to go directly to LEAs. I think we call this the mandatory subgrant. Those districts must reserve 20%, at least 20% of that allocation to address the academic impact of lost instructional time through the implementation of evidence-based interventions such as those listed on the slide. And importantly, districts also must ensure that the interventions implemented respond to students' social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs. The state must also follow specific requirements, as you can see here. So we had 10%, a maximum amount of 10% to set aside, and we had requirements with how we had to spend some of those, as you can see below. And the little boxes on the bottom right are what we're going to be talking about momentarily. It's the ARP ESSER state set-aside grant. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the allowable uses. So first, this slide lays out the allowable uses for ESSER funds that are detailed in legislation. You'll see that while several the ones that have an asterisk, several are not specifically included in the legislation, but US Ed has clarified through guidance that all of the ESSER funds may be used for each of the uses. For example, a district that wants to spend its ESSER funds to improve ventilation in its school buildings could use ESSER 1, ESSER 2 Carissa, or ARP ESSER, or a combination of all three to do that work. Next slide, please. Perfect. So as I mentioned earlier, the third round of ESSER funding through ARP have specific requirements for school districts. Districts must reserve 20% of their funds to address learning loss through the implementation of evidence-based practices. Districts must consider how they are addressing the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on underrepresented groups, such as those listed above on the slide. Thank you. Another requirement when planning for the use of ARP ESSER funds is that school districts must use their, So another requirement is the safe return plan. Districts, the specific term is the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan that districts must submit in order to receive ARP ESSER funds, to use ARP ESSER funds. So the LEA safe return to instruction plan is part of the ARP ESSER application in EWIG. The districts were required to complete this part of the EWIG application earlier this year. And to help districts do so, the NJDOE provided a template, which is posted on our webpage, on the ARP ESSER webpage. The safe return plan, I want to be noted, is required by law to be updated every 6 months, at least every 6 months. It also must contain an assurance and a link to where the school district has posted it on its website. So ARP use of funds. ARP also requires each school district to develop a use of funds plan. This required ARP ESSER use of funds plan is also part of each district's EWIG application. The plan should be developed in parallel to the work the district is doing to determine their needs and should address the requirements of the law, including how districts are addressing the student groups that were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So here's a graphic to really show again about the use of funds plan. I can't emphasize enough that the plan must address the impact of COVID-19 on the academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs of all students, and especially those disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, which is up to the school district to identify using any method you have or any data available to you. But the district must identify the group or groups that has been disproportionately impacted and have a plan for addressing those students' needs. So the ARP ESSER use of funds plan. Under ARP, school districts, this is another one of the ARP ESSER requirements. School districts must engage in meaningful consultation with stakeholders and give the public an opportunity to provide input into the development of its use of funds plan. Specifically, an LEA must engage in meaningful consultation with students, families, school and district administrators, including special education administrators, teachers, principals, school leaders, other educators, school staff, and their unions. Additionally, an LEA must engage in meaningful consultation with each of the following to the extent present in or served by the LEA. And this is in the law, I just want to repeat, this is a requirement. Tribes, civil rights organizations, including disability rights organizations, and stakeholders representing the interests of children with disabilities, English learners, children experiencing homelessness, children in foster care, migratory students, children who are incarcerated, and other underserved student groups. I will now turn the presentation over to my colleague, Andrea Sunderville, who will provide best practices on planning for the effective use of these funds. Andrea is our Title I coordinator in the Office of supplemental student services.
Thank you, Kate. With the infusion of this significant amount of federal funding, asking yourselves, how do we best plan strategically, turns the focus of our conversation now to the comprehensive needs assessment, which is the first step for you to be able to improve the effectiveness of your educational investments that are going to lead to stronger and really more long-lasting outcomes for students. As you are aware, a successful comprehensive needs assessment leads to very actionable priorities and meaningful long-term sustained change, a change that you are going to see continue throughout the educational career of the students, as well as for your staff and parents. Don't forget parents, because they're critical in engaging into the comprehensive needs assessment process. And as Kate indicated, achieving these results requires more than just a handful of people within a school or district to make decisions in isolation. It requires very active, ongoing, meaningful engagement of all concerned stakeholders in a process to examine, identify, and diagnose the challenges that must be addressed for continuous improvement to occur. So now when we think about the comprehensive needs assessment, it's important to understand, first and foremost, the comprehensive needs assessment is an ongoing systematic method by which you and your stakeholders at all levels will successfully identify, understand, and better address educational challenges. It really becomes the basis upon which you are going to be able to obtain a very clear and articulate, thorough picture of strengths and challenges within the district or school community that then can be used to determine the types of programs and services, evidence-based interventions and strategies to implement within the school and or district, strategies and programs and services that will improve academic achievement as well as address social emotional learning, positive behavior, and mental health needs. The comprehensive needs assessment obviously allows you to determine whether costs are necessary, reasonable, and allocable, and leads to very specific actions for change. Since the comprehensive needs assessment is really at the heart or centerpiece of your planning process, it becomes the basis from which you're going to develop a vision of the future. You're examining, where are we now in regard to academic and non-academic achievement? Where do we want to be once we implement programs and services, evidence-based interventions? So what is the gap, the area in between our current state and where we want to be? And it becomes, therefore, very important for you, districts and schools, for administrators, for staff, students even, parents obviously, to really conduct the comprehensive needs assessment as ongoing, continuous cycles of improvement, not just one-time events. And I'm sure that you have been seeing that as you're going through each iteration of the federal dollars that are coming through ESSER. Now, as you can see from the graphic on the screen, identifying priority needs becomes the first step in a series of very closely interconnected steps that also include understanding root causes. What is at the heart of what we're seeing that contributes to the area of need? Selecting appropriate evidence-based interventions and strategies, and ensuring that those address the areas of needs. Preparing for and implementing selected interventions and strategies, and continually evaluating whether those strategies are addressing your improvement needs and achieving the desired outcomes. Evaluation is critical to that interconnection and to continue to understand and be able to determine whether or not the programs you're implementing truly are addressing the needs that you've identified and that you are achieving those desired outcomes. You don't want to keep implementing programs if they're not addressing the needs and if they're not resulting in seeing the outcomes achieved. So as you have conducted your comprehensive needs assessment for ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds, and now the ARP ESSER funds, we know that you're seeing the comprehensive needs assessment as that first step of each iteration, each change for your school or district's continuous improvement cycle. And this understanding becomes even more important when you consider the entire universe of federal funding you've been awarded over the last year and a half. You have ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds, digital divide monies, now the ARP ESSER funds or ESSER 3 funds, not to mention your annual allocations of ESEA, IDEA, and Perkins dollars. So with all these federal dollars flowing into your districts and schools, it is very important for you to focus on the most crucial needs for students, staff, and parents. Look at the needs that you've already been able to address with the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds and your digital divide funds, and determine how best to leverage the ARP ESSER funds to either further enhance existing programs or services, provide additional programs and services that are maybe new, services that you've not implemented previously, or expand the universe of students, staff, and parents who will be served. So as an example, let's say one of your identified needs pertains to the decline in mathematics readiness skills for your 9th and 10th grade students. And at the heart of this is an associated need regarding SEL and mental health services for those students. You've also identified the need for training in SEL and mental health strategies and practices for both staff and parents, with an emphasis for parents on how to support learning in the home using these strategies. The district decides to implement an after-school tutoring program for the 9th and 10th grade students, as well as provide PD for staff and parents during 5 consecutive Saturday sessions. Now, looking at that entire universe of your funding, the district uses its full allocation of ESSER 1 monies to purchase all the PPE necessary for students, staff, and parents to engage in these programs. The digital divide funds are used to purchase laptop carts and establish a lending library for parents to borrow laptops as needed. The ESSER 2 funds are then used to purchase supplies and materials for the mathematics, SEL, and mental health a portion of the tutoring program, as well as SEL professional development for staff and parents. However, the district does not have sufficient funds to either hire a third-party contractor or contract with a community-based organization to cover the cost of the mental health training. This is where the ARP ESSER funds are used. So as you can see, you're really combining your federal funds, braiding those federal funds to support the total cost of a common program, service, and or goal. And later in our conversation, we'll touch briefly on that with a graphic representation. So keeping in mind the concept of a continuous improvement cycle, you can see from the next graphic that you are working through 5 discrete, very discrete, distinct phases. And in doing so, you're spearheading your efforts to plan strategically. You want to plan by defining your desired outcomes and really creating a plan, a strategy to achieve those. And this lays the groundwork for the rest of the comprehensive needs assessment process. Really think about the vision for the future. Create a district or school profile. Really begin to clearly articulate and lay out a picture of what is ahead. You then want to identify, collect, and analyze both quantitative and qualitative data. And despite this being the most labor-intensive phase of the comprehensive needs assessment, it really results in an incredible gift for you. A gift that's going to enable you to see patterns, trends, anomalies, and outliers in the data, and identify emergent needs in areas such as student achievement, professional development, parent and family engagement, curriculum and instruction, and possibly school context and organization. You want to interpret your information and present data in very digestible, understandable formats so that you're pinpointing very clearly, creating a picture for everyone to see the strengths and challenges in key areas that impact both academic and non-academic achievement. Such visual representations are extremely powerful ways to communicate information very quickly, in a very understandable manner, especially when you're disaggregating that information. You definitely want to determine a manageable set of priorities. By all means, do not try to address the full complement of your priorities, especially if you're seeing that you don't have sufficient funding. Select a manageable set of priorities so that you're actually going to see and realize outcomes for the students, staff, and parents. You want the priorities definitely to be authentic and very specific to the comprehensive framework and your local context. And finally, you want to connect to implementation by further examining your priority needs so that these can be connected to very relevant goals and incorporated into your improvement and/or action plan. The work itself really is going to drive the selection of appropriate interventions or strategies, how these will be implemented, and how improvement will be evaluated and measured along the way. The implementation phase is very critical to realizing change because of the comprehensive needs assessment process. So as you're seeing the comprehensive needs assessment as continuous cycles of improvement, we wanted to remind you of various types and sources of data to analyze during the comprehensive needs assessment. And as you can see from the slide, this certainly is not an exhaustive list. However, it does provide a quick snapshot of different types of data, quantitative and qualitative data, input data, output data, demographic data that you want to collect and analyze, as well as maybe the sources from which you're going to be able to find the data. Unequivocally, using and analyzing data to identify specific needs will inform your district's planning processes, will strengthen the effectiveness of your evidence-based interventions and strategies, programs and services that you're implementing based on priority needs, a manageable set of priority needs, will definitely lead to actionable priorities and meaningful long-term change, not short-term, but long-term sustained change, which will make a difference for all involved and will promote systemic coherence, very much a continuous cycle of improvement and better student outcomes regarding academic and non-academic achievement. Once you know your specific needs and you determine the types of programs and services to implement to address those needs, you will be better equipped to identify the various funding sources to support your action, from which you will build your improvement plans and certainly see achievement of your desired outcomes. Now, before my colleague, Dr. Damian Patino, shares information on the New Jersey Tiered System of Support Mental Health Support Staffing Grant, we encourage you to continue to enter your questions in the chat feature so that we can address them. Any questions we're not able to address during the presentation, we certainly will encourage you to send those to our ESSER account. And Dr. Damian Patino is my colleague in our division, the Division of Educational Services, who works with special education programs and deals very specifically and extensively with the New Jersey Tiered System of Supports. So now I will ask Damian to begin his conversation on the Mental Health Support Staffing Grant. Damian?
Thank you very much, Andrea. Just to make sure, can you, I'm assuming everybody can hear me. So if you can't hear, just put it in the chat that you're having difficulty hearing. So I'll take it us down the road with the first sort of set aside grant here, which is the NJTSS Mental Health Support Staffing Grant. Now, I want to keep in mind everything Andrea just said sort of applies to the process of deciding how to allocate the money that is provided in this grant, which means, you know, a really thorough needs assessment and really drilling down on what aspects of mental health are maybe lacking in your school district, or where gaps in services may exist. So the focus of this grant allocation is to further assist districts in developing this capacity to implement a multi-tiered system of support around school-based mental health. And the specific focus of this grant is on tiers 2 and 3 of this framework, which I'll explain as we go along. Thank you. By the way, you were right to move the slide ahead. I tend to backtrack accidentally. So yeah, some of you might ask, why do we continue to focus on school-based mental health or school mental health? And there are several reasons here, okay? So as you can see, a growing body of evidence suggests that the mental health of our students is paramount at this point in time. There's a combination of survey data that has gone on, survey research that has gone on throughout the pandemic, as well as public health statistics, as well as continued data that shows a sustained impact on the mental health of our children and adolescents. And this all points towards the increased need for supports in this area. So if we take a moment, let's reflect on the fact that as of October 1st of 2021, okay, a little less than a month ago, the numbers indicated over 27,000 New Jerseyans died as a result of COVID-related illnesses. In addition to this tremendous loss alone, we've had over 2 million New Jerseyans file for unemployment benefits in the last 18 months. These two factors alone would suggest that our students and children and adolescents throughout the state are really facing adversity, even traumatic experiences en masse. There's just some quick highlights of the survey research. 75% of educators strongly agree that social and emotional support for students has never been more important. Students with a diagnosed mental health condition self-report symptoms worsening during the pandemic. 20% of students self-reported periods of time in the last 18 months of experiencing stress levels that were 10 out of 10. And over 60% of parents have reported being concerned about the mental health of their child or children at home during the past 18 months. Public health statistics also suggest that children and adolescents have been experiencing mental health crises in higher numbers than before. So data that was compiled and reported in October of 2020 suggested that students ages 5 to 11 saw an increase of 24% in emergency room visits. So an increase in emergency room visits for mental health related reasons was up 24% in ages 5 through 11. For adolescents ages 12 to 17, our middle school and high school students, that increase was actually 31%. And then what we've seen is a sustained impact. That same set of data taken between February and March of 2021 showed a 40% increase in emergency room visits for students ages 12 to 17. So from 31% increase to 40% increase. So what that sort of suggests to us is that this is not an issue, mental health that's going away as cases go down and as COVID-19 vaccinations go up, et cetera. This impact is sustained and continues to need our efforts and has really brought mental health to the forefront as we continue to move forward. The next slide shows a sort of a graphic that depicts the kind of distribution of funds throughout the state. So 80% of our school districts are going to receive $45,000 with additional funding for 15% of the districts who've demonstrated more significant needs, and then additional funding for 5% of the districts demonstrating the most significant need. So a natural question many of you probably have on this webinar is, how did we determine this idea of increased need or significant need or more significant need? And we made these decisions based on data and based on 4 indicators in particular. We looked at the district's rate of chronic absenteeism. We looked at suspension rates, rates of violent incidents reported to NJDOE, and rate of substance abuse incidents reported to the NJDOE. And that data we looked at was from the 2018-2019, as well as the 2019-2020 school years. So 2 years of data went into this calculation regarding need. Next slide. So as a reminder that the multi-tiered framework aids a district or school in strategically targeting their resources, uncovered through data screening, assessment, and analysis. And again, I call back to what Andrea spoke about as far as comprehensive needs assessment. But we also want to talk a little bit about how the supports are additive, meaning that the tier 1 supports you already have in place are available to all students and remain available to the students who may need tier 2 and tier 3. Likewise, a student who receives a tier 3 support would also continue to have access and possibly receive tier 2 and definitely receive tier 1 supports. So the ARP set aside is specifically aimed towards strengthening tier 2 and tier 3 supports in your district. So this would assist students demonstrating need for more significant interventions. And we sort of divided this into sort of 3 buckets to really think about, right? The first bucket is a hiring, the possibility of hiring. So you could use this money towards hiring staff that specifically implements tier 2 or tier 3 interventions. I said at the beginning of this that you probably would see a cat at some point, and the cat is right hovering near the screen. So I apologize if you see me giving the old football stiff arm. It's to try to keep the cat at bay. Anyway, in particular, the funds would improve district capacity through hiring, or you could also contract with a provider to implement tier 2 and tier 3 evidence-based mental health interventions. The third bucket would be providing professional development and effective implementation of tier 2 and tier 3 services. So we're going to talk a little bit in more detail as we go through. $45,000 is a lot of money for professional development. We'll talk a little bit about how to, just do a little quality control around what that means with PD. So next slide, we'll get into the more detail around NJTSS. So New Jersey Tiered System of Support, you may have heard me use the term multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS. Those two terms are sort of like the generic and the brand name. Okay, so MTSS is the idea, the framework, the multi-tiered framework. That is the sort of generic term that every state uses with their model. NJTSS is the New Jersey brand name of the multi-tiered framework. And the idea behind this framework is that we address the academic, behavioral, social, emotional, and health needs. And when I say health, I also mean mental health of all of our students by providing a layered continuum of evidence-based practices, interventions, and services. So by looking at this at every student's academic performance, their behavior, their social emotional functioning, we're really seeking to educate the whole child. Some of you have heard that term, if you've been around the block long enough, whole child education has been around a long time. And we're really getting back to that concept, because what we do understand through decades of research and decades of studying the impact of mental health on academics is that the two cannot be pulled apart and separated, that they really influence each other. And they sort of have this relationship with each other and a lot of overlap. So some areas where it's been established that school-related mental health concerns can impact students is their ability to focus and attend to tasks, their ability to persevere with challenging tasks, the idea of resilience, for example. Lower academic achievement scores are associated with students who are experiencing mental health struggles. Increased absences. And again, these things are all interrelated. Less time in school, less time in the classroom, more time removed from the classroom, very often translates into lower achievement scores and reduced graduation rates, which you also see on this list. And then definitely last but not least is mental health concerns leads to a difficulty in making friends and maintaining relationships, which again is a huge reinforcing part of going to school and engaging in the academic world of the school. What we found is that actually persists through the lifespan. So it's a significant concern for our students, especially at this time. So other benefits of using the NJTSS framework to address mental health would include the idea that you're using a system and a process where you're using student level data to allocate resources in a very efficient way. So again, this ties in with Andrea's portion of the presentation that encourages you to thoughtfully engage in a needs assessment and use data to drive your decision-making and planning. So we encourage you to do that around mental health as well. NJTSS also creates an organized set of procedures in which you can identify students in an early detection model to get them the services they need quickly, and by establishing these tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. Early detection of mental health concerns means improved academic achievement, reduced disruptions at school, increased engagement in the school and in the community. And last but not least, this is an important aspect of NJTSS is that you're setting up a model where all students have equitable access to supports. So that idea of equity is really an essential core component of NJTSS. So NJTSS is a framework. It's a framework that helps you organize what you're currently doing. It is not necessarily something that you're doing in addition to everything else you're doing. We know you're doing a lot. We know there's a lot of money floating around. As Kate said in the beginning, you know, billions of dollars have flowed through to you guys, to the school district. So what we want to make sure, though, is that you're taking what you're already doing and you're kind of mapping it out into this tiered framework. So some examples of tier 1 programs or programs that you may already have operating in your schools are listed here. Universal Design for Learning, which really increases the engagement and the access for all students into the curriculum. So you're presenting material in multiple formats, and you're assessing in with multiple means. You know, and so the idea here is you're kind of taking SEL programming, positive behavior supports, or NJPBSIS as we call it here. Trauma-informed practices or restorative practice programs are very popular, as well as cultural responsive practices. You're taking those trainings and you're taking those programs that you're rolling out, and you're sort of braiding them and you're sort of mapping them out to see where are the gaps. And very often those gaps are with, okay, what do we do for students who need more than that? Because research suggests 80% of our students do fine with these programs and are okay. But what about that extra 20%? So let's talk a little bit about tier 2. Again, I'm sorry, this slide, I skipped this slide. So yeah, this slide here is just sort of giving an idea of what goes into tier 1. A lot of those programs listed on the previous slide are tier 1 programs. But you know, also part of tier 1 is just increasing your staff and your students' mental health literacy. What that means is like their awareness of mental health issues, their understanding of mental health, what is normal anxiety versus an anxiety disorder that is crippling and impedes student and staff functioning, et cetera. So the idea of tier 1 has been around a long time, and many of your schools are already doing this. So now we're going to get into tier 2. Sorry, I jumped the gun on that one. So tier 2 interventions are really provided to students who may be identified through multiple means. It could be a screening that you're doing. It could be a referral from staff, from parents, from guidance counselors or school counselors, sorry, or from child study team. But you see a student that might be struggling, might be even sometimes self-identifying as just needing additional supports. So to build tier 2 capacity, you're really looking at creating a menu of brief interventions that are available to students. Things like problem-solving skill development groups, right? So teaching students how to problem solve and how to try different strategies that are more pro-social strategies to resolve conflict, et cetera, rather than strategies where they have difficulty managing their emotions, et cetera. Goal setting and tracking is another very popular brief intervention or group that you can run, is just kind of helping students set goals, track their goals, and continuously improve on their academics at school. Small group therapeutic interventions. Some of our students have experienced grief and loss during this pandemic. Other family disruptions like divorce, illness, chronic illness, things like that. You can run small group therapeutic interventions around that. And then last two things I'll talk about here in tier 2 are there are programs out there and a growing body of evidence around mentoring programs and also check-in systems. One of the most popular check-in systems out there right now is called Check and Connect, which has a body of evidence behind it. It's considered an evidence-based intervention. That is a tier 2 intervention, but also has a little bit of a tier 3 component to it. It's pretty intensive. So Check and Connect is one example. Check in, check out is another example of a check-in system. Mentoring programs can also be really beneficial to students, and there's staff student mentoring as well as student to student mentoring programs. So I'm going to walk you just briefly through a theoretical example here as far as hiring staff to support tier 2 interventions. So how might that hire or that money going towards hiring that staff member go to use, and how might that benefit the staff, the students, and the community and parents as well. So staff would receive training from this person, you know, and a coordination of training around things like mental health literacy, around helping teachers recognize the early warning signs in class that a student might be struggling, as well as teaching teachers strategies to support students who may be experiencing increased distress, you know, throughout the return to school and throughout the pandemic, et cetera. And then also this person, you may also direct it towards them just implementing a check-in, check-out program, or something like a mentoring program, and they become sort of the coordinator of this program throughout the building or throughout the district. So that's one way that staff would benefit. Now, students obviously benefit by receiving these skill building groups, these small group interventions. They might also receive the mentoring program or check-in, check-out program. So they're receiving these additional supports beyond what you're already doing. And then parents and families, guardians, members of the community would benefit because they would have access to increased training around mental health literacy, but also around recognizing early warning signs at home and changes in child and adolescent behavior at home. And then also they may get the benefit of learning some brief strategies that they could try and implement in the home environment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the next two slides, but this list is recreated for you on our website as well, on the ESSER website, as well as when you do the grant application in eWIG, this document is provided to you. So there's a planning considerations document that breaks it into tier 2, tier 3, and professional development. So this is the tier 2, just some brief examples. We're going to move through this pretty quickly and get into tier 3. So at tier 3, we're really looking to build capacity to provide individualized interventions, right? So this might require outreach to community providers or outreach to practitioners or agencies in the community to help coordinate and provide this. And schools often don't have enough resources to provide this intensive support to our students. Tier 3 involves conducting thorough individualized behavioral assessments, doing function-based problem solving and coming up with behavior plans for individual students, as well as providing individual counseling and things along those lines. This also requires a coordination of outside resources. So an example of tier 3 funding here is possibly contracting with a community provider, a mental health provider. So how would that benefit staff? Well, same as we saw with tier 2 with hiring internal staff. We really would want that community provider to train staff, make them aware of the programming that's available to students, help them recognize early warning signs, and then also provide them with strategies to support students. Even some of our more challenging students, the students who may be experiencing more mental health distress, how to support them in the classroom environment and provide flexibility in the learning environment to accommodate for the mental health concerns that they might be experiencing at this time. Students would receive individual counseling. They'd be connected to community resources. They would have the benefit of an individualized behavior plan that's really tailored to the function of their behavior and why they may be running into some disciplinary issues in school. And then they also might get the benefit of having their parents and home visits incorporated into the counseling model. With tier 3, family counseling is often a possibility here. And that leads us to the parents' benefit, right? Which would be receiving training, recognizing early warning signs at home, and also receiving family therapy and in-home services at times. So again, I'm going to just direct you to the planning considerations document. There's a list of ideas. These are ideas to help you brainstorm the use of these funds in your district. So please take the time, look through the planning considerations for tier 3 as well. We also have a planning considerations for professional development. So rather than going through this list, you can look this over on the website. I just want to highlight the idea that we really want to start getting away from models of professional development and training that are one-off trainings, because the research really shows that very often a 2-hour workshop might be good food for thought, might get the ball rolling, might get some ideas started, but doesn't always lead to school change and to transformation and to really robust programming for students. And so what we really want to look at when we're planning for professional development is the idea of, can we leverage these funds for coaching, for ongoing training, for training in actual implementation, in practical strategies, in how to actually do this work, as opposed to, hey, this is what trauma-informed practices are. Here's a 2-hour workshop on it. Now you go on your merry way and go back to your previous habits in the classroom. So the idea here is, when you're thinking about professional development, and if you want to, sort of earmark funds towards that, try to engage in effective adult learning principles and, potentially impact professional practice in a meaningful way when you're doing this. So as we start to wrap up here with my section, I just want to give you some district examples. This is feedback from the field, and this was after ESSER 1 and 2 was distributed. Those funds were out over the summer. We went to visit a couple of schools. We also got some feedback from our schools. So I just want to walk you through really quickly a few of these examples. One is there was a district we worked with which had a large number of students who were Medicaid eligible, and they had a Medicaid funded counseling program to support students' mental health in the younger grades. They were planning on using the funds to expand upon those services and contract with this provider to provide students support for middle school, high school students who may not be Medicaid eligible. So to expand sort of an existing program to meet the needs of more students. In addition to doing this, some districts were looking at tracking. So there are some software programs out there that can help you track and identify students for early interventions, or early warning systems. So some districts invested in programs that really look at things like academic grades combined with behavior and discipline referrals, combined with absences and chronic absenteeism. And they flag students who may need additional supports. So some districts have invested in that to identify students for these tier 2 and tier 3 support, and to track them once they get into tier 2 and tier 3 to measure how are they responding to those interventions. To address students in crisis, one district decided to contract with a community provider. So instead of sending students to the emergency room whenever there's a mental health crisis and there's concern about harm to self or others, they're referring them to a community provider who does a thorough assessment, works with the family, and follows up when the student returns to school to ensure that the student is connected and that there's not just a quick note that says, hey, you need counseling, go back to school. There's more robust activity around students who might need those supports. One district reached out. They had a large influx of refugee families, and families coming into the community who have experienced trauma, have arrived at, with refugee status, and were looking, and needing additional mental health support. So they contracted with a regional service provider that was like kind of had a larger scope throughout a larger portion of New Jersey to provide those services and supports. And last but not least, this one could be a little tricky at times, but we've had some districts say that they use some of the funds, the earlier funds, to contract with social worker part-time to provide sort of wellness programming for staff, because a lot of our staff, as we all feel, may be feeling burnt out right now and may find it difficult to support students because of their own stress levels, et cetera, and the constant state of change that we've all been living in for 18 months. So those are just some examples. I'm going to point you to those resources before I wrap it up. The quick reference guide, I highly encourage you to access, especially when you're looking at like, well, what mentoring programs are we talking about here? There's a section, if you go to tier 2, there are a couple of websites around mentoring you can link to that have a lot of resources and point you towards specific mentoring programs. The next two resources here are for early childhood. That's the Center for Infant and Child Mental Health Consultation and National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. And then the National Center for School Mental Health and Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, those two really go hand in hand, but it's out of the University of Maryland is the central hub for school mental health, and they are funded by the federal government. And they have a system there called the SHAPE system, which can help you in the planning phases by sort of mapping what you're already doing and identifying some of those gaps and helping with that. And last but not least, I just encourage you to partner with and reach out to our other offices, or I'm sorry, our other departments at the state, like Department of Children and Families. They have a Children's Interagency Coordinating Council, or as I call it, KAYAC, in every county. And I really encourage educational, like school districts and educational entities to participate in these councils, because it's a great idea, a great way to network, make connections, and also help, sort of cover gaps in services. And there's also the New Jersey Youth Services Commission, which is linked on that site as well. So I would now like to take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Peter Frank. There he is. Good morning. Yes, it's still morning. Good morning, Peter. So Dr. Frank, Dr. Frank is going to take you through the grants supporting teaching and learning. Thank you all for your time.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Dr. Patino. Good morning, everyone. It's definitely good to be here again. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Dr. Patino. The Division of Teaching and Learning Services recognizes and applauds the remarkable efforts of schools and districts in serving their students, families, and communities, especially in how they have stepped up to address the disproportionate impact of the pandemic. I echo the sentiments of the Executive Director, Karen Bingert. I've never been prouder to be in the field of education as well. Before us all is an unprecedented opportunity to not only recover education from the costly impact of the pandemic, but from the grips of ills that have caused various missed opportunities and learning gaps in our students. Striving towards this aim, we are thrilled to provide additional funding to districts to address the academic impact of lost instructional time. So why are we increasing resources towards teaching and learning? So here's a quick snapshot from findings noted in our department state plan. The academic performance of New Jersey students were harmed by the pandemic, and the data shows that it is disproportionate when disaggregated by student group. Additionally, input themes from New Jersey stakeholders and residents, many of whom are here today or will be watching the recording. So I just want to thank you for that, your input. Your input themes included that we support a broad spectrum of enriching activities, especially in areas hit hardest by the pandemic, as well as encouraging closer partnerships across disciplines and institutions around the shared goal of addressing the academic, social, emotional, and health needs of our students and school systems. As a result, there's a strong need for us to increase resources towards teaching and learning. Next slide. So we have 3 grants that directly support teaching and learning, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide and the next explaining them. The Accelerated Learning, Coaching, and Educator Support Grant funds professional learning that expands the instructional capacity around New Jersey's Learning Acceleration Guide that was released earlier this year. Through the principles of the guide, districts may administer high-quality assessments, such as formative assessments, that are valid and reliable to accurately assess students' academic progress and assist educators in meeting students' academic needs, including through differentiated instructions. And for clarification, the terms accelerated learning and learning acceleration used here are synonymous to generally refer to the deep learning that occurs through implementing the guide's 4 principles. The Evidence-Based Comprehensive Beyond the School Day Activities Grant funds comprehensive extended day learning opportunities that occurs during the out-of-school time periods. And this is time periods defined as time before school, after school, on weekends, and during the school breaks within the academic year. The comprehensive approach to the Beyond the School Day activities means that we are providing students with a safe place to go, the necessary academic support, enrichment activities, workforce development skills, while equipping them with the life skills that will nurture and encourage positive and healthy choices. Our 3rd grant is the Evidence-Based Summer Learning and Enrichment Activities Grant. And this funds a plethora of engaging summer learning opportunities that occurs during the summer months. I believe that each of us could think back to a summer learning experience that we had during our time in school, and it was so transformative that it still has an impact on us today. That's part of the reason why I also got into the field of education. The department's 2021 Summer Learning Resource Guide encourages a reimagination of summer learning, and this grant can empower districts to do just that, to provide these powerful summer learning experiences for our students. So districts will receive an at least amount for spending on the allowable activities noted here on the slide. So you will receive at least $50,000 for the Accelerated Learning, Coaching, and Educator Support Grant for coaching activities that fall under the 4 listed principles under that grant. The first is teaching and learning that fosters the social, emotional well-being of students, families, and educators, improving the equitable access to grade level content and high quality resources for each student, prioritizing the depth of instruction rather than the pace, and implementing an accelerated learning cycle to identify and address gaps. I particularly appreciate these principles because they prioritize student well-being as just as much as learning. As educators, we know that students do not care about what we know until they know that we care about them. And we're here today to learn about how we can best use these funds because we do care. For the evidence-based comprehensive beyond the school day activities grant and the evidence-based summer learning and enrichment activities, we have at least $40,000 for activities that span tutoring, resocialization initiatives, project-based and experiential learning, and training for staff and families to support the learners. Although these grants cover similar allowable uses, the need, context, and timing determines the optimal use for each. Additionally, each grant covers the cost of activities occurring during their respective time bounds. For example, tutoring as a part of a comprehensive beyond the school day activities is most helpful to students as a just-in-time support within the academic year. Similarly, summer research, writing, or art programs may prime students for the content that they will cover the following year in a manner that uses experiential learning as mental anchors to mastering challenging concepts within the academic year. Because of the expansive allowable uses in each grant, it is important that your unique plans for the grant, including professional learning, are tailored to the needs of your students and your district's priority problems that have been exacerbated or caused by the pandemic. In other words, instead of the allowable uses driving your plans for the grant, your priority needs based on the pandemic should be directing and driving the plans for the grants. Your needs assessment make this achievable through the required consultation with all stakeholders, as my colleague mentioned earlier. So meeting with your staff, students, and families are all going to be critical, as well as implementing different systems of gathering school data so that you can better identify and prioritize your needs that your plan will address. I previously mentioned that districts will receive an at least amount, which means that some districts will receive more based on their needs. All grants supporting teaching and learning uses a weighted enrollment allocation formula that assigns additional weights to lower grade bands, English language learners, and students eligible for free or reduced price lunch. This funding formula responds to the disproportionate impact of the pandemic by giving additional funds to districts with populations that have been hit the hardest. So thinking about using these funds innovatively, the reimagination of education requires each of us to push our thinking, because spending money conventionally may not help us come out of the pandemic stronger. So increasing our efforts, such as increasing student voice on our needs assessment, leaning into the community collaborations that allow us to thrive during the pandemic. How do we leverage these beyond the pandemic? And increasing our evidence-based decisions are all going to be important. So on this slide is a short list of thoughtful questions from our county colleagues for our collective consideration. How can grant money be used to propel students to greater levels of achievement emerging from the pandemic? What does going beyond traditional in-school, after-school, and summer activities look and feel like for all stakeholders? How can we promote an interdisciplinary approach to learning and deepen both project-based and experiential learning? What partnerships need expansion to realize enhanced teaching and learning experiences in and outside of the classroom? One of the things I love about New Jersey is that there are wonderful examples happening right across the state. And I'm going to talk about a few on the next slide. So these examples here come from our Learning Acceleration Guide, and we are grateful to these districts for sharing their initiatives with us. Our department continually seeks to spotlight all of the exemplary practices happening across the state. And so if you're doing something wonderful and innovative that is having a wonderful impact on your students and your community, certainly do let us know. Under the Accelerated Learning and Educator Support Grant, Hamilton Township School District has implemented a home visit program for their students identified as needed additional supports. They use data to help them determine which students need these type of supports. They use suspension, chronic absenteeism, as well as social emotional needs. School administrators, counselors, and teachers make home visits and have positive interaction with these students and families throughout the year. And this is an excellent example of Learning Acceleration Guide Principle 1 in action. The professional learning, year-long coaching for staff that made all of these home visits possible can absolutely be empowered and expanded by this grant. And so districts are doing a lot of wonderful things that fall under the principles of the grant that the grant can empower. An example of a comprehensive Beyond the School Day activities grant comes from Elizabeth Public Schools. Their Reopening Together plan is minimizing learning gaps by allocating additional time daily in the afternoon to address both students and parental needs. Their plan also includes dedicated time every Wednesday for professional development at the district and school level for team members in the areas of academic, social, emotional, and technology integration. Furthermore, the district also invested in an online platform to serve as personalized learning and individualized intervention in order to support each student's individual needs. And our third example here for the Summer Learning and Enrichment Activities Grant comes from the New Brunswick Public Schools, and they developed a summer program for all learners with a focus on accelerating learning through an inquiry-based approach. And so over the summer, students explore concepts and apply what they've learned within the context of authentic real-world problems. There are many examples that exist across the state, and one of the ways in which you may see these funds is as seed funding to do something different, powerful, and impactful as you respond to the needs caused by the pandemic. So let us switch gears. I'm going to talk about the two questions that require a descriptive response. The first question essentially asks districts to describe your plans for the grant, and it includes a short list of must-include items. So these items prompt your responses to consider the following questions. Is the plan responsive to the unique and shared academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs of our students? Is the plan equitably serving all students based on the pandemic's disproportionate impact on vulnerable student groups explicitly? How is success defined in your plan? And how are you continually assessing for that metric throughout the duration of your plan? In doing so, you allow your plan to be agile by using information that you're gathering to adapt in order to best achieve your goals. And finally, how does your plan collaborate with stakeholders throughout the entire timeline? And this is from the conception of your plan to the implementation and the evaluation. Referring to your needs assessment here will be important, and ensure that your narrative is under the required character limit. This is a generic question that sort of what you'll find on all three applications. There is one exception in that for the application of the Accelerated Learning Educator Support Grant, it will be important to describe the specific principle that your plans will fall under. The second descriptive question asks districts to essentially describe a tier of evidence that is the basis of your plan. So the response here allows you to justify your plan with evidence and sharing its likelihood to succeed. If your plan is based on tier of evidence 1, 2, or 3, it will be important to briefly explain the level of evidence and your reasoning of its use. And be sure to include any URL or citation to the relevant evidence. If you're using tier 4 evidence, it will be important to explain the reasoning of your plan based on a credible rationale model, or if your plan is being studied, including a URL to the relevant model that you are using. So for example, if you're using a logic model to come up with your plans, ensure that it's posted on your website, and then you may link that URL in your response. Or if you're partnering with a research organization that's studying your intervention method, include a URL to the institution studying your intervention method so that reviewers can see that your program is being studied. Tier 4 evidence is encouraged in cases where there's a dearth of published research. And this is a possibility given the novel context of the virus. And so using a logic model or partnering with these organizations will be important to increasing the likelihood of success. Next slide, thank you. So there is a collection of planning resources that will be posted on our website to help you in developing your plans. Although you are not required to use them, you're certainly encouraged to do so. The next slide will give you a snapshot of the information that you'll find in there. Each document contains an activity dimension paired with a curation of supportive resources. Again, you're not required to use them, although you are encouraged to do so. But ultimately, as long as you're using an evidence-based approach to your plans and you're citing those evidence, your plans should be good. Next slide, thank you. Overall, I truly am excited about all of these grants because all of the grants, including the ones that support teaching and learning and the NJTSS grants, help educators and districts ensure that all New Jersey students have equitable access to high quality education and achieve academic excellence. As educators, one of our shared values is excellence, and excellence is never an accident. It is the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, skillful execution, and the vision to see obstacles as opportunities. Thank you all for all that you do. Thank you for being here and watching the video. And I return the platform to Dr. Seahead.
Thank you, Dr. Frank, for that excellent information, and Dr. Patino on the excellent information you provided on the use of ARP ESSER state set-aside grants. In the remaining few minutes, I'm going to briefly go over ways that we can recommend coordinating the use of different ESSER grants to make the most of all the relief funds that school districts have received. A lot of the slides, thank you, are really dense. And since you will be getting these access to these slides after the presentation, I'm not going to read everything on there. I'm going to instead leave some time for questions and just give you a broad overview of what we want you to get out of these slides. So this is really about, this slide is about coordinating the use of ESSER funds. So braiding together the funds to maximize the use of funds. And what I really want you to understand is based on here, each funding stream has an expiration date. They differ, including the tidings amendments. The expiration dates are shown under each ESSER round of ESSER below. So what we would recommend is that you think about these funds like you think about the cartons of milk in your fridge. You want to drink the one that's going to expire first. So we urge you to spend your funds on the allowable uses in the order of the fund's expiration to maximize your use. And second, with the other thing I want you to take away from this is to remember the words of Peter Parker: with great wealth comes great responsibility. There are the funds will be monitored through collaborative monitoring processes. And there is an annual reporting requirement for all recipients of ESSER awards. The data on the use of funds must be reported to New Jersey DOE, and we must report it to the United States Department of Education. So we want to track the use of funds expenditures from each ESSER grant well by retaining relevant documents, relevant fiscal documents the way you normally would, like receipts, invoices, signed declarations, and also because of the different requirements with ARP, you also want to remember to memorialize all the meaningful consultation you've had with stakeholders to develop your ARP ESSER use of funds. And you want to collect information that allows you to evaluate the impact of your use of funds on students. Next slide, please. This slide is looking at the table of allowable uses by priority area in each of the rounds of ESSER. So on the very left-hand side is the priority area, whether it's allowable in each use round of ESSER funding, and then the different state set-aside grants that can be used to meet those specific priority areas of ESSER. Next slide, please. I'd like to, in the next two slides, draw your attention to a very valuable resource that WestEd produced called Meeting the Moment: How Education Leaders Can Maximize Federal COVID Relief Aid to Support More Equitable Student Learning. The report provides a model of how LEAs may ramp up and down their investments in education while addressing the needs exacerbated by the pandemic. So what the report points out and what this graph shows is that we're in a really sweet spot where all of the funding streams are available right now for school districts to use. So again, it's important to keep in mind using the funds that expire first, but also thinking about and planning for how you can use all of your funds in a way that maximizes sustainability for your district. And the next slide, please. Perfect. So this goes over the 8 strategies to consider during early planning to maximize the impact of federal aid. This is from WestEd. The report is great. Due to time, I'm going to move on so we can get through the last slide. So this is an overwhelming slide, but it's really helpful resource for sustainability. This, the slide shows you which funds are the federal grants that are available at all times that can be used for the same priorities that are emphasized with the ESSER program. So when you're thinking about how do I maximize the use of my funds, and ESSER is really about seed money and how can I start something, but this slide is how can you sustain it? So which funds can be used for the same priorities when the ESSER money is gone? I urge you to take a look at it. It's overwhelming right now, but it's a fantastic resource for the future. And lastly, I just want to leave you with the important dates. The ARP ESSER application is due to us November 24th, 2021. ESSER funds monitoring. ESSER funds will be monitored as part of the collaborative monitoring process, both the on-site monitoring and the desk monitoring. And the annual ESSER performance report will be, data for that will be collected shortly. More information on that will be available shortly. So thank you. And I think with the remaining time, we can open up for questions. If you want to type them in the chat, we're here to answer any questions you might have.
Dr. Seahawk, this is Leslie. We don't have any questions in the chat, but I think I'm wondering, Donna, if persons are able to unmute themselves and ask questions if they have any.
Yes, people have the ability to unmute themselves. Leslie, that's a great idea. So if anybody would like to do that, feel free to jump in. So I see a question in the chat. Is there a problem with offering tutoring that may also be funded by Title I?
This is Andrea Centerville. Again, based on your needs assessment, the tutoring services through the ARP ESSER funds are first and foremost going to address the impact of based on the COVID-19 pandemic, as far as how you are preparing, responding, and providing services for students returning safely to the school. So it really depends on how you're utilizing Title I funding for that purpose and how those monies combined with the ARP ESSER funds would be utilized. It really depends on what you're doing. Maybe you could provide a little more specific information in the chat.
Or Elizabeth, if you want to unmute yourself, feel free to offer a follow-up question.
I mean, in general, it doesn't appear as if there would be difficulty doing that, but it'll depend on the needs that you're trying to address.
Okay, yeah, we have in our district, we have extensive learning gaps, but if we were offering similar tutoring services that we're also offering to students eligible for Title I services, there may be some overlap there. Is that overlap okay?
Yes, because you're further extending the services that you are providing initially with the Title I monies. Remember, the Title I rules and regulations do not apply to the ESSER funds, the ARP ESSER funds. So you don't have the Title I supplement not supplant rules applying to these additional dollars that have come as a result of the pandemic. So it doesn't appear, based on what you're saying, that there would be difficulty. But if you would like to discuss further, by all means, please either email the ESSER account, or you certainly can email me directly if you'd like to do that, and we can talk about it further if that would help you. But from what you're providing, I think you'll be fine.
All right, Leslie, I think you shared in the chat the email address. So if people have questions following this presentation, feel free to reach out to our colleagues at the department. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, as well as our colleagues at the Department of Education for sharing their time, their wisdom, their experience. It was incredibly informative. And NJPSA and FEA are always thrilled to partner with the department, particularly in such critical areas as this. Leslie, any closing comments by your team?
Actually, Donna, we'd just like to say thank you and thank all that participated. Again, just like you said, if you have any questions following the presentation, please email the ursa@doe.nj.gov. It's always a pleasure partnering with NJPSA. Thank you for the opportunity.